You have problems at the branch, we need to look at the root. You're born dead to God in the Spirit, self-centered. That makes you religious, trying to get your needs met. You'll never fill it with anything but Him. The second problem is you're insane, lying thoughts, lying emotions. You don't judge those things. You become obsessed with things. The next thing is you've lost your identity. You don't know who you are. You have an impression you want to leave, and you're just trying to cover up what you are at your worst. And you got that from looking to other crazy people and believing them when they told you who you were. And you've tried to change it or maintain it, either one. People control you all the time. Do you know that you actually believe then that acceptance is based on what you do? And that's part of why you're trying to change. And you're trying to cover up your image. And you're working and working and working. And you're never resting, because you know if people find out who you are, they'll reject you. But the thing is, God accepts you, and this is good news, on the basis not of what you do, but who you are. Now there's another thing that we'll look at that has to do with acceptance. And people want acceptance more than anything else. And they don't want to live down here in rejection. So they're given a list of rules to keep, and if you keep the rule, you'll find acceptance. But when you keep that rule, what happens?
They give you another one.
They just give you another rule. And so if you want to live on the list, it doesn't matter how many lists you get, you're going to get one more list. You're going to get more and more rules that you have to keep. And eventually what you'll do is you'll jump off and say, I'd rather live in rejection and down here than try to keep your rules anymore, because you're going to keep extending it until I can't. So I'm giving up. I'm quitting and I'm stopping. It amazes me how many wives or husbands will sit in my office and decide that's the day to tell their mate they're leaving. And the biggest shock is when the other one starts crying. And the fellow will say, I've been married 25 years and I finally got the message that no matter what I do isn't pleasing to you. How come you're not happy I'm leaving? I had to laugh at this one Australian years ago when I was talking to him, and he said, don't open your mouth, don't say another word. Because I started talking to you 5 years ago when I wanted to leave my wife. Now I've been with her 27 years. I could have killed her and been out of prison by now. And he was really sick and mad. We sat down and talked, and he was mad and just replayed to her all the rules that she'd given him, that if he kept them, he would eventually be acceptable to her. And finally she dives off and says, well, I'd rather live in rejection. And that's why a lot of people will walk away from God, because they just see the rule after the rule after the rule. And finally they get angry because you can't keep them. And actually all that happens when you go to church is to get more condemnation and more rules that you can't keep. Until finally they just dive and they say, that's it, I'm going to rebel and not live to God anymore. So in this diagram we're just explaining again acceptance. And what performance-based acceptance does to you. That if your acceptance with God is going to be based on what you do, and you've been working to change yourself for others, now you're going to work to change yourself for God. If it's based on that, you'll be hung. Because there'll always be an addition. Why do you suppose it is? I'm just asking. People listen to that stuff. You ever see these silly books on the cost of discipleship? That the disciple does this and the disciple does that, and if you're going to be a disciple, you do this and you do that. And there's some new book out now that if you're going to be a revolutionary, the revolutionary Christian. Have you seen that one? It's called Revolution. It's a big book, and the eight characteristics of a revolutionary. And you've got to be a revolutionary. I can't believe people buy that stuff. And a guy was telling Doug and I about it, and I said, yeah, but they left out the 9 point of a revolutionary. And he said, what's that? And I said, a revolutionary doesn't have to be taught the first 8 things. I mean, you can't be taught all that. Why do people listen to this? Why do you go to these conferences with a list and the rules and the rules and the rules for you to try to keep, and people are madly taking their notes? Who's doing it? And all it'll do is eventually bring you to a place of rebellion. So here's a mountain of acceptance. I don't want to live in rejection, so I try to keep all the rules. But eventually I'll see I can't, and I dive off of them. I can't have my life based on performance. I know that. And yet all of us in our flesh are looking for something to do that will give us something to glory in. just take a look at the diagram, stare at it for a minute and see what it's saying. In this circle, we'll put a problem. What problem do you want to pick? So you pick one. Now there's a lot of problems you can have. You can have the bad or the good bad, whatever it is. It's always fun. People like to pick on the alcoholics, the drug addicts, those kind of things. But whatever the problem is, it can be anxiety, it can be worry, it can be depression. Whatever your problem is, put it in this circle. We'll use the example of an alcoholic, but when you get in your group, you come up with a problem and put it there. Here's the point. If the problem is the problem, then we've got to stay here and focus on that. And so if alcohol's the problem, then the thing we need to do is give you those pills that make you sick when you drink, so you'll be a sick drunk. That's all it's going to do for you. It never does make people stop drinking, but they're just sick drunks. Or we'll put you on an island where there is no alcohol, if alcohol's the problem. But what people will tell you, and everyone can relate to this, is no, it was an event that made me have my problem. And so someone rejected me, or I didn't get the job, or I lost the job, or the child was rebelling. Something took place. There's an event that caused my problem. So some people are problem-oriented and some people are event-oriented. And they think they've gone to the root because they figured out the event. So this event made me do this. And in order for me to have a problem, I have to be in rebellion. And do you see how anger justifies rebellion in your own life? That for you to rebel and to move into the way that isn't the way, you've got to be in anger. You'll always be angry. If I decide to reject Betty, I'm angry. If I decide to go into my idolatry, I'm angry. Anger justifies rebellion. I can feel good about it. It's a little game I play with myself. Our whole point in this diagram is the problem isn't the problem. The event isn't the problem. The anger and rebellion isn't the problem. We'll ask the next question, why did the event bother you? Why did it affect you? So you ask a person what happened today and why are you sitting here in this chair drunk? Well, I lost my job. Well, I know. A lot of people lose their jobs and they're not drunk. Why are you drunk? Well, what does that event tell me about myself? If you go back to this diagram that we had here, I have what I am at my worst, and I'm covering it up with a success suit. I'm trying to avoid what I am at my worst. When an event takes place that strips away my success suit, it proves I'm this when I've been working so hard not to be that. That make sense? And so the reason that's going to bother me is because of my identity. I'm born self-centered, insane. I let self-centered, insane people tell me who I am, and now an event just proves it. So it's all right for a lion to come in the room and panic, but it's not all right to panic and go look for lions. You have feelings right now, and say you have the feelings of being worthless and a failure and unwanted. You get up and carry those feelings with you, and you look for things to prove it. So all of a sudden, you sit down at the dinner table out here for lunch, and you sit next to a person. As soon as you sit down, they grab their plate and they leave. And you're already sat down feeling worthless and unacceptable and unwanted. So now what's that do for you? It proves it. And that person has a stomach flu and they just ran to the toilet to throw up. And it has absolutely nothing at all to do with you. And so it's revealing more in me than it is in the other person. And there's the question I would have you ask yourself is, I'm having these feelings, why? Why am I being controlled by this situation and by this event? And what does the event reveal in me? And what he's revealing in me is where he'd like to work, not in the other person. You know, Betty, I've talked about as a thinker, and one of the things Betty will do is just sit there and look like this. And she's playing in her head. She's gone. But that also happens to be the way my mother would stare at me. And I really wanted God to change Betty. Isn't that a bit stupid? Because I got an idea there's a lot of other people that'll stare at you. And especially go to a conference full of pastors and you get a lot of stares. Because they've all got the bless me if you can look, just staring at you. So there's always someone to do that. Maybe God is using Betty to deal something in me. If I see God in the situation for me, and this is where all of us in this room can be selfish, in that we will see, and God allows me to see every event for me. What is it doing in me first? So what is this event revealing in me? And now we go back and we begin to see what's going on here. So in this diagram we're saying we take a problem. We don't believe the problem is the problem. That's all you need to say. There's an event that caused the problem, and that made you rebel, and you had to get angry to rebel. But here's my question. I want to know, why did the event bother you? What is it revealing about you? It's all right for the lion to come into panic, but not to panic and look for the lion. What did this reveal in you? Now, how are you going to fix it? Well, we've been laying a bit of foundation about God so you wouldn't reject Him. And you wouldn't think it was just another list you got to do. He accepts you because of birth. What if He came into your life and became your life? And He killed the old identity and gave you a new one. And He said you were acceptable, and you were loved, and you were perfect, and all those things. Then this event wouldn't bother you. You wouldn't have to rebel, so you don't have to get angry, and you wouldn't have to have the problem. So now we've gone to the source of what the problem is. Okay? Problem's not the problem. What was the event? Well, the event isn't the problem. It pushed a button in your past. What if we could get rid of that? I'm not telling you how right now. I'm just saying what if. See, at this point in the lecture, or at this point in counseling, when you're going through this with a person, do you know you have a hook in them? Because often, for the first time in their life, someone's verbalizing what they've always experienced. And it's just a hook. And I love working with unbelievers because I'll never mention Christ, and I'll get all the way through this and say, you know what? I really believe Jesus is the answer. But if you want to hear about Him, you got to make another appointment. And that's all we're going to talk about is Jesus. They always make an appointment. Because there's a hook in there. You understand me. This isn't just religion. This isn't talking about what you need to do and how you're going to be pleasing. You're talking about where I live. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing how I live, and I want to know what's that. And for me, that's the gospel. I don't see the gospel as my ticket to heaven and that's it. And me living in hell. All right, we're going to go through these diagrams. And you'll start back at the beginning and just work. And the main thing is for you to just see what's in each diagram, relate that. You don't have to get it all, get the key point. You don't even have to tie them together perfectly, but to understand those and then come to this end. We started out saying the root problem in the back of my mind is you need a life. Because this old life or Adam life is right here. That's where we started. That tree, little tree, is saying there's root rot, and the root rot is this life right here, and I've ended there. And we've come back to that, and now we're seeing how it feeds all these branches. So we started there and we ended here, and we ended there, actually. So you see where we went? And as you go along in that, you can add things, take things out, that kind of thing. Now, what you've done at this point, you got the first part of the lecture done. There's 5 sections. The main thing is a flow in you. That you understand it, you see how it applies for you, and then you begin to share it with others.